Alistair and Penelope Sterling are the undisputed sentinels of St. Jude's of the Valley, ensuring that only the right sort of families breathe the sanctuary's dignified air. But when they banish a vibrant young newcomer to the basement annex to preserve the church's curated perfection, they unwittingly trigger a tectonic shift in the congregation. This is a story of marble veneers cracking under the weight of genuine grace, and the realization that the most divine invitations often come with a side of lemon cake. Welcome, beautiful soul, to Threads of Grace. This is a sacred space where stories are woven with faith, hope, and truth. Here we untangle the messy, the miraculous, and the in-between moments of life, and stitch them back together with grace. Every episode is a reminder that no thread of your story is wasted, not the frayed ones, not the hidden ones, not even the broken ones. Whether you're listening in the quiet of the morning, on a long drive, or in the middle of a season where you're searching for clarity, you belong here. Expect stories that stir your spirit, conversations that ground you, and reflections that gently point hearts back to God. So take a deep breath, settle in, and allow these threads to wrap around you. This is Threads of Grace, where faith meets story, and every life is beautifully stitched with purpose. Before we get started, be sure to subscribe and hit the alert button so you don't miss any of our upcoming stories on faith, transformation, and the threads of grace that bind us together. The heavy oak doors of St. Jude's of the Valley didn't just swing open, they yielded, and only if Alistair and Penelope Sterling deemed the visitor worthy of the air inside. It was 10:45 a.m., exactly 15 minutes before the processional, and the Sterlings stood in the doorway like twin sentinels carved from marble and fine wool. Penelope adjusted her silk scarf, a vintage Hermes pattern that whispered of old money and quiet pews, while Alistair checked his pocket watch. "The humidity is doing dreadful things to the flower arrangements, Alistair," Penelope murmured, her eyes scanning the approaching sidewalk. "And I see the Henderson boy is wearing those rubber-soled shoes again." "Lamentable," Alistair replied, his voice a dry baritone. "One wonders if they mistake the sanctuary for a gymnasium. I shall have a word with his father about the spirit of reverence later this week. Or perhaps I'll just forget to include them in the gala seating chart." To the casual observer, the Sterlings were the church's most devoted servants. They funded the new pipe organ, chaired the vestry, and polished the silver chalices with their own hands. But to the congregation, they were the invisible filter. They were the reason the front three pews remained mysteriously empty until the right families arrived, and why the new outreach programs always seemed to stall if they attracted a crowd that didn't shop at the local organic creamery. A young woman, clutching a frayed Bible and wearing a dress that was perhaps a season too late and a shade too bright, stepped onto the stone porch. She hesitated at the threshold. Penelope smiled her polished practice smile. "Good morning," Penelope said, her tone dripping with a sweetness that felt like a warning. "Are you looking for the community center down the street? They have a very spirited, contemporary service there. Lots of guitars." "Oh no," the girl said, her face flushing. "I was hoping to join the service here. I just moved into the apartments on 4th. Alistair stepped forward, subtly narrowing the gap in the doorway. "The apartments. How industrious. You should know our liturgy is quite dense. Very traditional. Most find it a bit inaccessible without the proper background." "I don't mind learning," the girl offered. Alistair looked at Penelope. A silent communication passed between them, a shared calculation of social capital and aesthetic cohesion. "Of course," Penelope said, her hand resting lightly on the heavy brass handle. "But we are actually at capacity for the main floor today. Fire codes, you understand. There's a lovely folding chair in the basement annex where the audio is piped in. It's much more casual down there." As the girl retreated toward the side stairs, Penelope smoothed her skirt. "There," she whispered. "The sanctity of the morning remains intact." "Well handled, my dear," Alistair said, checking his watch again. "Oh look, the Windothrops are pulling up. Open the doors wide, would you?" The final notes of the organ swelled, vibrating the stained glass until the air itself seemed to hum with the Sterling's curated perfection. As the right sort of people filed out, exchanging polite, measured nods, Alistair and Penelope resumed their posts at the exit, acting as a two-person receiving line for those they deemed worthy of a handshake. "A triumph of a sermon," Alistair remarked to a passing vestryman, though his eyes were already tracking a stray gum wrapper on the stone path outside. "Perfectly orderly," Penelope agreed. "Not a single disruption." Once the upstairs sanctuary had been sufficiently emptied of its elite, the Sterlings began their final sweep. Penelope paused at the heavy door leading to the basement annex, her nose crinkling as if she expected to smell damp concrete and desperation. "I suppose we should check on the overflow," she said. When they pushed open the door to the basement, the silence they expected was nowhere to be found. Instead, a roar of laughter and the clinking of mismatched ceramic mugs drifted up the stairs. The young woman from the morning was not sitting alone in a folding chair. She was at the center of a long, tattered table, flanked by the basement regulars, the elderly widow who lived on a pension, the local baker who smelled permanently of yeast, and the boisterous family whose children were always a bit too loud for the upstairs acoustics. The girl's face, which had been tight with rejection an hour earlier, was now radiant. She held a plate of homemade lemon cake in one hand and was deep in conversation with the baker's wife. There was no piped-in audio playing. The group had long since turned off the speakers to conduct their own prayer circle and share stories. "Oh, hello," the girl called out, spotting the Sterlings shadowed in the doorway. She stood up, her late-season dress swishing with a newfound confidence. "I wanted to thank you for sending me down here. I've never felt more at home. These wonderful people have already invited me to their Tuesday potluck." The baker's wife waved a flour-dusted hand. "She's a keeper, Penelope. We've already signed her up for the choir, the informal one, of course." Penelope's hand tightened on her Hermes scarf. The basement felt warm, vibrant, and infuriatingly crowded with a spirit she couldn't quantify or control. "How?" "Communal," Alistair said, his voice tightening. He looked at the girl, then at the group embracing her, and realized that in his quest to guard the gates, he had accidentally locked the life of the church in the cellar. "Come, Penelope," Alistair whispered, turning back toward the empty, pristine sanctuary above. "We have the silver to count." Behind them, the door swung shut, muffled by the sound of a community that didn't need a gatekeeper to know they were exactly where they belonged. The Sterlings climbed the stairs in a silence, so thick it felt like the very velvet they had donated for the altar rails. Above, the sanctuary was a masterpiece of stillness, cool, silent, and mathematically perfect. But for the first time, the silence didn't feel like reverence, it felt like a void. Alistair moved toward the sacristy to begin the ritual of counting the tithes, his movements precise and practiced. He pulled out the heavy ledgers, the ink black and undeniable. Penelope sat in the front pew, her back a rigid line of defiance against the joy she had just witnessed beneath her feet. "It won't last," she said to the empty room, her voice echoing off the high rafters. "That sort of emotionalism. It burns out. Order is what sustains a house of God." "Indeed," Alistair replied, though he found himself staring at the gold-plated collection plate. He thought of the girl's frayed Bible and the baker's flour-dusted hand. He compared it to the crisp $100 bills he was currently smoothing out. The math was perfect, yet the sum felt strangely small. Over the next few weeks, the Sterlings noticed a subtle, tectonic shift in St. Jude's of the Valley. It started with the basement regulars appearing earlier and staying later. They didn't scurry to the side stairs anymore. Led by the girl in the bright dress, whose name, they discovered, was Grace, they began to linger in the main hall. One Sunday, a toddler from the basement crowd escaped his mother's grip and ran down the center aisle during the silent prayer, his squeaky shoes chirping like a frantic bird. Penelope's jaw set. She waited for the mother to scramble, in shame. But instead, a woman from the right sort of family, a Winthrop, no less, reached out, caught the boy, and settled him on her lap with a wink. The gate was no longer holding. That Tuesday, Alistair called an emergency vestry meeting. He stood at the head of the table, the light from the stained glass casting a fractured red glow across his face. "We are losing the character of St. Jude's," he declared, his hand flat on the table. The basement annex was designed for overflow, not as a breeding ground for unsanctioned gatherings. It disrupts the service. It threatens the dignity of our traditions. He waited for the chorus of agreement. He waited for the Henderson father to nod or for the choir director to complain about the informal competition. Instead, the room remained quiet. Finally, the Henderson father spoke up. "Alistair, my son told me he went down there last week because he felt too stiff up here. He said for the first time he understood the gospel because someone explained it over a piece of lemon cake." "Lemon cake is not a substitute for Bible study," Penelope snapped from her seat by the door. "No," the man replied gently, "but it's a very good invitation to it." The meeting ended without a vote. The Sterlings walked home that evening, the gravel crunching beneath their expensive soles. For years, they had believed they were the pillars holding up the roof. Now, they felt like ornaments on a building that was learning to stand without them. The following Sunday, Alistair and Penelope stood in the main hallway, as usual. The doors were wide. Grace walked up the steps, her dress still bright, her smile still radiant. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling." "Good morning, Mrs. Sterling," she said, pausing at the threshold. She didn't wait for permission this time. She reached out and placed a small, wrapped bundle in Penelope's hand. "I made extra, for the silver counting." She moved past them and took a seat, not in the basement, but in the fourth pew, right behind the window throps. Penelope looked down at the bundle. It was warm. The scent of lemon and sugar cut through the expensive perfume on her wrists. "Shall we go in?" Alistair asked, his hand on the heavy oak door. He looked tired. The marble was starting to feel heavy. Penelope didn't answer. She looked at the bright, messy, noisy sanctuary, then back at the pristine, empty sidewalk. She tucked the cake into her bag, her fingers trembling just slightly. "Open the doors, Alistair," she said, her voice lacking its usual bite. "It seems the fire code is the least of our concerns now." The Sterlings stepped inside, not as sentinels, but as guests in a house that had finally opened its doors to the world. The following Sunday, the silence in the Sterling manor was stifling. Penelope sat at her vanity, the silk scarf tied with such precision it felt like a noose. Beside her sat the small, grease-stained parchment that had wrapped the lemon cake. She had intended to throw it away, but the scent, zesty and sweet, had permeated her dressing room. She had tasted it. Late Tuesday night, alone in the kitchen, she had taken a singular, elegant bite. It hadn't tasted like unsanctioned emotionalism. It tasted like the Sunday mornings of her childhood, before the proper background and the old money had thickened her skin into marble. When they arrived at St. Jude's, Alistair took his place at the doors, but Penelope lingered near the sanctuary. She watched as the girl, Grace, entered. Grace wasn't wearing a bright dress today. She was wearing a simple navy shift, but her face was darkened by a heavy, unmistakable cloud of grief. Her hands, usually so steady, were trembling as she fumbled with her prayer book. Penelope watched the basement regulars approach her, whispering comfort, but for the first time, Penelope felt a different kind of irritation. It wasn't that they were being communal, it was that she was standing on the outside of a circle she had spent 40 years building a wall against. As the service began, the organ thundered, but Penelope couldn't hear the music. She only heard the small, stifled sob coming from the fourth pew. Midway through the liturgy, Penelope did something that caused Alistair to drop his hymnal. She stood up, adjusted her scarf, and walked, not toward the altar and not toward the exit, but toward the back of the church. She slipped through the heavy door and descended the stairs to the basement. The annex was empty of people, but full of their presence. Mismatched chairs were pulled into a circle. A stray knitting needle sat on a side table. The air smelled of cheap coffee and genuine life. Penelope sat on a rickety folding chair, the metal cold against her silk skirt. She looked at the walls, covered in crayon drawings from the loud children she had tried to banish. One drawing caught her eye, a stick-figure church with a door so large it took up the whole front of the building. Underneath, in wobbly letters, it said, "Everybody in." The door at the top of the stairs creaked open. It was Grace. She had fled the service, her eyes red-rimmed, and her composure shattered. She stopped when she saw Penelope sitting there, looking like a swan in a storm drain. "Mrs. Sterling." Grace whispered, wiping her eyes. "I'm sorry. I know I shouldn't be down here during the sermon. I got a letter from home. My mother is ill, and I felt so small in those pews." Penelope stood up. For the first time in her life, she didn't think about social capital. She didn't think about the gala seating chart. She thought about the lemon cake and the stick-figure church. She reached out, not with a polished practice smile, but with a hand that shook just as much as the girl's. She took off her scarf, the silk cool and soft, and pressed it into Grace's hand to dry her tears. "The pews are designed to make you feel small, dear," Penelope said, her voice cracking the marble veneer. "I know, because I helped design them that way. But the basement is where the foundation is." Penelope pulled a second folding chair closer. "Sit with me. Tell me about your mother. And tell me how you get the lemon zest so bright in that cake. I suspect I've been using the wrong kind of sugar for a very long time." When the service ended upstairs, Alistair hurried down the stairs, frantic and confused. He found his wife sitting at the tattered table, a mismatched ceramic mug in her hand, listening intently as Grace spoke. Penelope looked up at her husband. She looked at his polished shoes and his pocket watch, then down at her own hands, which were now stained with a bit of spilled coffee. "Alistair," she said softly, "stop counting the silver for a moment. We have a Tuesday potluck to plan, and I believe we've been assigned the lemon cake." The gatekeeper had finally left the post, and for the first time in 40 years, Penelope Sterling wasn't worried about the humidity or the rubber-soled shoes. She was simply finally home. Thank you for listening. The story of the Sterlings warns us against the subtle sin of spiritual elitism. It is easy to confuse order with exclusion and reverence with snobbery. When we decide who is worthy of the air inside, we inevitably end up breathing the stale air of our own pride. The Bible offers a sharp correction to the Sterling mindset in James 2 verses 1 to 4. My brothers and sisters, believers in our glorious Lord Jesus Christ must not show favoritism. Suppose a man comes into your meeting wearing a gold ring and fine clothes, and a poor man in filthy old clothes also comes in. If he shows special attention to the man wearing fine clothes, have you not discriminated among yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts? Furthermore, Penelope's discovery in the basement echoes the hospitality commanded in Hebrews 13 verse 2. Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by so doing some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. My friends, check the gates of your own heart. Are you guarding a sanctuary that is empty of life, or are you willing to go down into the basement of human messiness to find the real presence of God? True faith does not require a gala seating chart. It only requires a seat at the table for whoever happens to walk through the door. Thank you so much for listening to the Sterling's journey and transformation. I invite you to comment below and share this story within your Christian community, too. Spark brave conversations on embracing inclusivity. Audit the gates we have up in our lives. Are there basements in our own churches? By sharing this story, you are helping to weave those very threads of grace into the fabric of your own community. Until next time, keep walking in the light, keep your heart open to the overflow, and remember, the truth is always worth the cost. This is Threads of Grace.